Okay. We're going to talk a lot about bolts. A lot of this is just hardware overview, and we're going to talk about how to make a good joint. But there's a lot of background that you got to get before we get there. This is a weird room layout. It's history in here. So, when we talk about a bolted joint, we're talking about things that you guys play with all the time, these types of structures. Most of what you're doing is bolted joints. And you need to know what's a bolt. A bolt's not a screw. They're completely different. Screws are typically pointing, but this part can also be called a screw depending upon how it's used. If your material is threaded, in other words, and we'll talk about what that means, if it just has holes in your material and you have to use a screw and a nut, that's going to be a bolted joint at that point. If it's threaded, then it's a screw. That's the technical way of the differentiation. So when someone says, hey, I need a machine screw so I can bolt this together, that's okay. You don't have to beat them up about it because you came to this class. Why do we use bolts? It's about mechanical advantage. Who's had physics at all? Any physics? This guy over there. All right, so who's ever lifted something really heavy? Did you ever take something heavy and slide it up a ramp instead? So we'll talk about the physics here. The work is the same. To pick this box up and put it in the back of this truck, or to take this box and push it up the ramp and put it in here, it's the same amount of work. What we're talking about is the force times the distance. We use less force pushing the box up the ramp than we do having to He-Man it up and set it on the tailgate. You can try that at home. So the whole point of the bolt, and I want you to all take your bolt, take your screw part, look at it, and you'll see that it's got like this curlicue thing going on. The whole point of that is that it's an inclined plane wrapped around a shaft. So this is a simple machine, one of the basic simple machines, and that's how it works, is it's force over distance. Now, when we're talking about how much oomph I get out of one of these, we have to start talking about threads per inch. That's the term that we use. So in an inch of length of the bolt, how many threads can you count? How many threads can you count on this one? Anybody? Start counting. I know, I'm terrible. Nobody?
10, 11?
Yeah, about yeah, in that 11-ish range. So this is about a ½ inch long bolt. If it's an inch long, this is, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a hint. This is a 24 thread per inch, number 10 bolt. So let's talk about the parts of the bolt. This one doesn't have a shank on it. I stole yours, didn't I? You want that one? There you go. We got lots of them. So they'll all have a head, and there's a whole bunch of different types of heads that go in the bolts. This one is pretty common, Phillips drive. Everybody know what Phillips drive means? Shaking of the heads. Setting and going, no. Shaking of the heads, yes. All right, let's try to be interactive. So there's lots of different types of heads. We got a slide for that. This one doesn't have a straight shank because it's not long enough. When you get to a longer bolt, where you're bolting really thick things together, you'll see that you run out of threads, and the end of that is actually called the run out. And it's done a certain way so that your nut doesn't go all the way to the end and jam on there and get stuck. So that run out is an important part of that. Different types of threads can be on the same diameter bolt. If we talk about a coarse thread, which is what this is, UNC, or a fine thread, UNF. So on a number 10, our options are a 1024 or a 1032. That would be 32 threads per inch. That would be a fine thread bolt. Now, why do we have different ones? It's about getting a little more bang on the buck. It's also about how much thread engagement you're going to have into your part. So we keep talking about threads per inch, that's the pitch. Now there's lots of different kinds of threads, but what we're really worried about on the bolts are these ones that look like this triangle. Yep, all the pointy ones. And what we really want there out of these things, there's not a marker. Oh boy, it's a good thing we got this working because there's not a marker. What we want there is that between the bolt and the nut, that those threads kind of all shift to one side. Oh, you found a marker. Hey, excellent. That they all shift to one side and when the joint is tight. All the way over here. They'll never see it in the camera. I don't care. That's fine. This is for you guys. Put the camera over there. So that this thread off of the nut, we actually want these to be pointy because we're trying to get these things to make contact here when we're tightening the joint and all those threads jam against one side. Friction is a good thing here when we're making the joint. Now all these other threads that you see down here, those are for like if you're using the power screws, if you're doing a linear actuator to move something in the machine. Maybe you've seen some of those, but a lot of Acme thread type things. And those don't have the pointed tip on them because we don't want those to engage. We want to use that force over distance by running a motor to spin it and run something up and down the screw, but we're not looking for those to bind up. Left-handed and right-handed threads. In general, the rule is
you use your right-handed.
We're going
whenever
now.
it's spinning, right?
I don't know if we're gonna run out of juice.
But you don't usually see a left-handed screw unless you're using using something that rotates left. Because what tends to happen if you use something with a right-handed screw but it turns left, it unscrews itself, and that's bad. And you don't want that. So normally what we use for FTC is going to be right-handed screws because, well, standard.
The rule is righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. Because 99% of the bolts you're going to encounter are right-handed threads. In a spinning machine that's going a certain direction, you'll encounter left-handed threads. And if you've ever worked on a Chevy, you've probably found that to be a problem. Someday.
Propane and gas connections.
Yeah, propane and gas connections, that's right. Yeah, those are left-handed on purpose too. Yeah, some plumbing stuff.
When working with bolts, you have like different type of forces. There's some good ones like tension. Tension is really good because it like holds your stuff together. But then there's really bad, like when you start shearing, which I'm pretty sure we talk about. Well, I know we talk about, because it starts breaking your part, which is really bad, and you don't want that.
So we've seen some of this happen in the field for FTC. We've seen bent bolts. We haven't seen compressed bolts too much, but we have definitely seen a couple of them where people have sheared their heads off in something. So, talking about shear force, not Shear Force. When we're talking about these components being together with a bolt through them, the shear forces are acting perpendicular to the shaft on the bolt. So, if you've got two things that are pulling, going force applied this way on that bolt that's in there, then you'll have a shear force if you're trying to pull apart. Go to the next slide. So, what she mentioned a minute ago about tension on the bolt is very important because we want the bolt to preload this joint. So, if it's loose, it's a goose, right? What we want to do is we want to make sure that we get it tight to where we've got a good joint together. And then you're going to go ahead and, for the purposes of what we're doing in FTC, do a quarter turn. And that's going to put some tension on the bolt, and that bolt is going to act like a spring to help hold that together. Go ahead and go to the next one. We're doing great on time, guys. So, when we talk about any type of rotational force, we're talking a lot about torque. So, if you've got a little short wrench, I don't know if you guys have all seen the Allen wrenches, the hex wrenches. They've got a long side and a short side. You shove that really long side in there, into that cap screw, and you start to turn it. And it just, man, I can't turn it at all. Flip it around and use that long side, you get more torque. So if you've got too much tension, you'll get necking. And what this is we've pulled on the spring too long. Who knows what a slinky is? Show of hands. Okay, that's better. It's early. We've got to wake up, guys. So, have you ever taken that slinky and you've got one end and your buddy's got the other end and you pull way too far? The slinky's no fun anymore, is it? So, it's no longer a slinky. It's a coil of wire. And that's what you wind up here, is if you stretch your bolts too much, you'll get necking and eventually they'll break. Now what's shown here is a little bit more of a compound load, but still, that's fine. Rock on. So if we're doing, back to that Chevy, we would use a torque wrench of some kind because we want to make sure that we torque it right. We put the right amount of preload on a bolted joint so that it has the proper tension. We don't tear the bolt up, but at the same time, we're keeping our joint good and tight together. We never use this in FTC. Not that we should, because what we're doing is good enough. 90% of our robots are going to drive what? Maybe 45 matches, 100 matches, 120 matches. They don't have to have a long life. And you can go back and you can tighten them up a little bit. So we don't really typically do anything, but I want you to just be aware that there's a torque wrench with a bar, so that when you are torquing it, this bar is independent and it reads on a gauge. This is old school, man. This is awesome. Good luck finding these. They got the digital ones, which are cool. I can't afford those. These clicker ones that you can get at Harbor Freight are great. Or like in industry, we use these hydraulic ones where the machine does all the work. You hook it all up and you can sit there and you go, and everybody kind of stands about 10 foot away. Go ahead. Again, it's about how you're putting the torque on the bolt. So if you're way up on the wrench, you're not going to put as much torque with the same force as if you're out here. You don't have to, I want you to all to memorize this. Are you ready?
Nope.
No, go back. I just want you to know that this is out there. This is not something that we're going to use in FTC, but there are torque charts for whether or not your bolts are dry, like these are here, or whether or not they're lubricated. So you'll use a different amount of torque on a lubricated one because of that binding. Because it's lubricated, it's going to turn easier, and that's going to give you the ability to put a little bit more tension on the bolt and break it. So this is the whole thing in here for that. Just be aware that that's available to you if you ever need to go look it up. Same thing in metric. Newton meters. All right, go on. And you can do, go back. All the math is here. If you want to take a picture of that, you can do this at home. I had to put it on there sideways to get it on there, so yeah, it's all fun.
Different type of bolt.
You'll do that in engineering school at some point. And
Once.
once, that's all you have to do it, just once.
Then you use the table.
That's exactly right. Then you go to the table, or if you're smart, you put it in Excel. Then you don't have to worry about it again. Lots of different heads here. Who knows what kind of head this is based off of this table?
Pan.
What?
Pan.
He's the winner. This is a pan head. Truss head is just a bigger diameter pan head. You use this in softer materials. If you ever put together IKEA furniture, you'll see some pan head screws and stuff. Using cheap soft wood, it's awesome. You'll see in FTC, maybe some pan head, but that's the main one you're gonna see is the socket cap. Pittsco uses the socket caps, and Go Build It uses the socket caps, and everybody uses the socket caps. Sometimes a button head. All right. So talking about locking the threads, when you tighten the nut and you get preload on the bolt, that's great. If I'm in a vibrating surface, type of service, I may need something additional to help hold those threads and keep my thread engagement. That is going to be a lock washer. Go ahead. Oh, sorry, we put double nut first. So this particular thing is called a jam nut. When I want something to go together, I'll take a couple of nuts, and there's a special nut for a jam nut, but you can use just 2 nuts for what we're doing. Say I want to have something that's bolted together and I never want it to come apart. I can take these 2 nuts and I can jam those together. And that will actually distort the threads between those 2 nuts in addition to pulling this tight. So you can see where you start to get your engagement. I wind up with engagement on the lower nut to hold things together and the upper nut to pull apart. Carry on. Lock washers. There's a star washer in there. So lock washers add a little bit of force to keep the nuts tight. So
A star washer is what you guys have.
when you tension the bolt itself acts like a spring. But it's nice that we can go ahead and add a spring. Go ahead and flip to the next one. Oh, well, we have those out of order. Those are nuts, not lock washers. What are we gonna do? Flip one, go to the next one. Okay, there you go. So you can see the lock washers. What you've got here in this in your hot little hands out of this baggie, these are external star washers is what we typically call them. The external tooth lock washer. You'll see these go back a slide. If you've got any old Pittsco stuff, you'll see these like this attached to the nut. They're worthless when they're flattened. So if you're using these over and over again, and you go and you look at the one you got right now. I'm gonna go like this because I'm old. You got to see that there's a bit of a pitch on each one of those teeth that are there. That's what's going to act as the spring to kind of keep some tension on the nut so that your joints don't come apart. You're driving around the field, you're using mechanism. It's like digga 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 digga, right, on the mechanism wheels. So what you wind up with is a lot of vibration. So if you just nut something together, it has a tendency to come loose. You put some lock washers on there, or better yet, use a nylock nut. So it's got nylon actually inserted into the nut and the one end of it. Then you can kind of keep things together a little bit better. The nylocks only work if you actually have threads past the end of the nut. If you're only catching a couple of threads in the end of the nut, how are we doing on time? We've got 5 minutes to go. Then you're not doing anything because the nylock is not going to grab those threads. Carry on. Okay, flat washers. You'll use flat washers if you've ever got an issue where you drill 2 holes and they're like this, and you have to egg one out. So you use a big. Oh, yeah, there you go. So this is a number 6 fender washer. That's actually a big one. That's for when you make a big mistake. And then the regular flat washers are typically used. What that does is that allows you just spread some of the load. It allows you to actually turn better on softer materials. Keep going. When you're making holes, if you're going to machine anything, you want to make sure that you start with, what's my joint going to look like? What are my pieces? And then, what holes do I need to have? Because not everything that you do is going to fit in this erector set type stuff, right? So not everything's going to match. So you're going to have to drill some holes. Go find you a drill chart for the size screw that you're going to use and for the material that you're looking at. If you're going to tap it, or if you're going to drill a hole that's the right size. You start with your pieces, you find your fasteners, and then you go figure out what drill you got. The big mistake I watch people do all the time is they go, oh, I need to put these two together, I need a hole. And then they go find a bolt. It's too late. You've already made a hole way too big or way too small. Then you got to go drill it again. So find the drill chart. They got it in metric too. So, the demo part.
Alright. So, this is supposed to be like a frame, like your robot frame. So if you put one bolt in, make an axle. So it turns. At this point, it's a 4 bar. But whenever you add more bolts into it, it becomes more sturdy. But if you only put 2, you still have some wiggle room, right? But when you put a third one, more support, it becomes a little bit more sturdy. So now you won't have that much wiggle.
So if you've got 1 point, it's a point. It's an axle. Everything can spin around it. If you got 2 points, it's a line. So I get a force in that line, but my parts can still basically wiggle along that plane. I want a third bolt outside of that plane to go ahead and make my joint. Depending upon which, got a lot to digest today. Depending upon where your forces are going to be, if you're building a lug off of an upright, you want to make sure that you put enough bolts in there. Don't just put 1 or 2 bolts in there because things will start to flop. Then your alignment's not going to be right. When you're picking up parts or when you're trying to throw a ball or something, things are going to get loose. Your robot will be unreliable. So, and there's all kinds of structural patterns that you can look at out there. The patterns that we see all the time in this are typically the Go Builda, the Tetrix, and the Activotics. And now Rev's got a pattern too. We don't see a lot of these failures, but we have seen these failures. Where someone puts a bolt in a piece of soft material, like a piece of plastic, and it rips out. We will see some tension, but more often than not, we see this one, where the hole's getting a little bit bigger and everything's kind of getting loose. That happens a lot if you don't have a nice secure joint to start with.
And also this one. At least for me.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the heat manning it out. Should have used a washer. It's a history class, so there's a historical bolt there. They used to have to blacksmith these things and make them, but now we've got all kinds of other ways to do things. We got Velcro, metal Velcro, but don't forget those as options if you've got to have something that you got to get into and get out of real quick, like you're holding down a battery, so that you can make quick changes on the fly. Questions?
Great class.
Who needs coffee? Yeah, good job. Good job, guys.
So, can I add?
Yes, please. Yeah, feel free to add on.
I like the right-hand rule of electromagnetism.
Yep.
Where or a Cartesian grid, so you get 1, 2, and this is the resulting force is 3.
Yep.
Instead of the righty-tighty. Because it helps me if the screw needs to go this way, or that way,
Right.
or that way. So
Yeah, if you're bolting backwards,
whichever way you want the screw to go, that's the way to turn.
Yep.
Pocket guides. Like you can go to Lowe's or Home Depot, a lot of those tables.
Yeah, a lot of those tables are
You
in
can
them.
get those little pocket guides, put them in a like toolkit or whatever. And that way, if you don't have internet connection and you want to like something in the field, you can just look it up.
Right.
Very handy. You can usually get them at Lowe's, Home Depot, or Amazon.
Yep.
Can you go back one slide? The fastener failure on the bottom right half.
Yep.
We see that a lot if it's an over torque condition.
Yes.
And it will fail at the most inopportune time during the match.
Yes, it will.
So, some people think, well, if a little bit of torque is good, a lot of torque is better, and with fasteners, that's not true. You can over torque them, they start to neck, and then they will fail.
Yeah.
Well, they're using star washers like these actually helps prevent that kind of thing.
Right.
You guys can keep the bolts, by the way.
No.
Yeah, I think, one to six now.
I don't think Crystal's was.
Oh, come on, please. I don't care. I got a little great big bag.
Look at this.
I got a giant
Matthew's going with
This way you can tell the variance in here.
I'll take my parties.
I started off as an engineering major in this.
Yeah. Well, I started out in electrical, and I got my associate's degree in electrical, and then I switched over to mechanical. And, so, yeah, that's how I wound up doing this today.
I started doing engineering, trying to decide if I wanted to go mechanical or electrical. I was wanting to do like air practitioner.
Yeah.
And then got bored with some of my classes. I was talking to my advisor, and he said, "Some of your classes."
Wait. Time out. How'd that happen?
Yeah, and I just stayed.
Yeah. Oh, is that the clock?
Time to go to next class.
All right. That was the bell. Here's the bell.
Are we going to go very long time? Do we need to do that?
No, I actually had monkey snot on the slide. We kind of got in a hurry.
Hi. Yeah, you can see me. Hi. Have a nice day.
At 8:32, and I was like, oh, we're not gonna make it to all this.
Knock knock.
It's good. It's informative.
Who's there?
Well, you know, it's
The annoying cow. The annoying cow. Move. I hope you're having a good day.
Well, that's what it is. Yeah.
I'm definitely defocusing your camera.
I started to bring one.
I need to.
And they're
Oh,
like,
why did the kid? How did the kid go to high school? He he used a ladder. He went to high school. Haha. Knee slapper. Oh, you can't see my knee slapper.
why is it warmer in here? Because this is a hot presentation.
I think we're about to like restart.
Probably because
So,
the HVAC guy didn't.
have a
do
good
his
day.
job right, is what I'm gonna guess.